It is our favorite time of the week again. Time for hashtag Rising Qs, where we get to answer your questions. All right, Saagar, what's the first one?
Okay, number one, let's throw it up there on the screen. Can the left fight a potential Biden administration the same way that the Tea Party did during the Obama years? Hashtag Rising Qs. What do you think, Krystal?
So I guess the question is like the way the Tea Party fought the Republicans during the Obama years. Okay, so overall, I think a Biden administration is going to be fairly impervious to pressure for three reasons. Number one, they won the primary by telling the left to shove it. Number two, if they win the general election, it will have been while telling the left to shove it. And number three, the primary political innovation of Democrats since the Clinton era is basically like portraying themselves as moderate, trying to appeal to the center by telling the left to shove it. But there is an interesting dynamic that the questioner here sort of points out with the Tea Party, which is where you can really start to shift things and put pressure is you win a couple primary victories, even in blue districts, where the only threat then to members of Congress's reelect is a threat from their left. And so even if they aren't unseated by an AOC or Cori Bush or this type of candidate, they see that as a threat to their political survival, and that moves them. That's probably the most likely sort of place where pressure and power can change in the coming Biden administration.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's about as good as it's going to get. You also need more. You would need more progressive leftists in a squad type caucus, which is actually willing to stake fights out on political grounds.
Yeah.
That also really depends both on who is president, the makeup of the Congress, I mean, whether they keep the Senate or not, because that's another thing where you can actually be quite powerful if you're in the minority and you can go against, whenever the minority leader wants to strike a deal, you can nuke that deal. There are a lot of different things that the Freedom Caucus did, like the Tea Party back in 2010, and revisiting how that worked is important if you want to do something.
One last thing that just occurs to me is in the Tea Party era, Fox News and conservative media basically took up with the Tea Party.
That's right.
They took the Tea Party side.
Yep.
That's not going to happen with MSNBC and CNN and New York Times are not going to take the squad side. So you're going to be fighting an uphill battle, both in terms of like the power dynamics, but also you're going to have to fight the media dynamics. You're going to portray you as like villains for every last thing that you try to do.
That's right.
All right, next up. Do you think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are making the strategic choice to rarely mention policy? Does this help them more than hurt them? I think it is a strategic and very intentional choice to try to keep their like John Kasich coalition of imaginary moderate Republicans. Remember, Joe Biden is only winning 5% of Republicans. Donald Trump is winning 4% of Democrats. Basically nothing that they've actually won over in terms of moderate Republicans. But to keep this coalition together, to not upset the moderate white suburbanites, it's very much sort of policy free. Let's just focus on the coronavirus response. I think it may well work, but I think if he offered an actually bold economic agenda that excited the base of the party, young progressives and working class Latinos, I think he could win in a potential landslide.
Yeah, it's so funny. I think on policy that Biden is overwhelmingly unpopular. Like most of the policies he supports, and Kamala Harris, overwhelmingly unpopular, but his posture towards politics is very popular. And Trump is almost like the opposite in terms of the policy that he pretended to support in 2016, and if he pretends to still do that, is quite popular, but his political posturing is very unpopular.
Right.
And so, in a way, I feel like things need to switch up where the Trump campaign needs to be much more policy focused, and it's a strategic choice and the correct choice on the Biden campaign for not being policy focused, because a lot of the policies they support are not actually all that not that popular, but their whole posture of being able to like restore the government and make everything calm, that's quite popular.
In a lot of polls, healthcare is the number one issue for people. And if it's not number one, it's number two. I mean, it is a very important issue. And neither of these candidates is really talking about it. I mean, Trump gets asked about it and he's like, oh, I'm going to have a plan. You're like, okay, what is it? I'll get back to you. I mean, literally nothing. All he knows how to do is like attack Obamacare still, like he's a circa 2010 Republican though. We're like, you've been in charge now, buddy. Time to step up to the plate. The Biden team, we covered here this week how Democratic strategists and Democratic politicians are now saying, whoa, 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 on this whole like adding the public option thing. That might be too hard to do, so we may have to back away from that. So they're downplaying right now expectations on healthcare. Neither is really talking much about it, not to mention all of the economic aid that polls at like 80% support, and it's just all being left on the table because they don't want to piss off the donor class, I guess.
Shocker. All right.
Last one.
Number 3. Could the polls be off for Biden because corporate interests are using algorithms to selectively vet the pool of respondents so that they can manufacture support for Biden? Look, it's possible. I wouldn't say that there's quite a bit of evidence for it. There is also evidence for a shy Trump voter phenomenon. There is evidence for the likely voter versus the registered voter screen. There is evidence about education weighting and why that matters, about partisan weighting. Those are the things I would be much more concerned about. Really verse yourself in polling methodology. There are a lot of different things that you should understand about which polls and why and how they support things and who they're polling, live voter versus online. Those are the things I would be much more concerned about than this, but I would not rule it out. There are a lot of very shoddy pollsters out there, both Trump and Biden friendly, which basically exist in order to tell parties what they want to hear. So always keep that in mind.
That's a big industry.
Yeah.
Telling people what they want to hear is like the industry in this town, as a matter of fact. We try to look at polling averages.
Yes.
We try to look at which pollsters are most highly rated, who's been accurate in the past. There is some evidence for a shy Trump voter phenomenon. The bigger evidence of why the polls missed in 2016 is around failing to screen for education, and so undercounting that white working class, high school educated vote that ultimately swung for Trump. But we also shouldn't overstate how much those polls were off. They predicted Hillary Clinton would win the popular vote. She did.
Yes.
The national polls were actually pretty accurate.
Around 2% of the popular vote. Which
a couple of swing state polls that were off by just a few points, and that was enough to swing the difference. Now, look, if you look at the polling landscape now, a similar shift towards Trump would put him, again, right in that spot of potentially eking it out. So in that way, it is a very similar dynamic. So, yeah, I would have a little bit of a skepticism about some of the polling. But when you're looking at the averages, it's probably not off by more than a couple points in either direction.
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right. Thanks for watching. We'll have more for you here later.